As some of you may have figured out from the background music I use in the more video essay of my videos, I really like lo-fi hip-hop. Even now, even in a day and age where it's increasingly getting criticised as bland and repetitive. So if you don't know what lo-fi hip-hop is, though God knows how you've managed to navigate YouTube without at some point encountering it, lo-fi hip-hop at its simplest is low-fidelity hip-hop, so it has that classic record player style crackle on it, and it's often made by ordinary people in their bedrooms and kind of shared all over the internet without any copyright restrictions on a lot of it. That's the simple explanation. More generally though, it's a relaxed, slightly melancholic genre of hip-hop, regularly without rapping or any lyrics, just the beats themselves with occasional samples. Designed often with the purpose to relax/study in mind, hence a lot of mixes or live streams of lo-fi beats to relax/study/game/every other conceivable activity too. So it tends to be simple, melancholic, and often centres around themes of loneliness, depression, love or lost love, nostalgia, and all sorts of those feelings. It's a genre that I think has kind of just past its peak in popularity in some ways, but it rose to internet fame because people do need background music to study to. Lo-fi hip-hop tends not to have vocals and the beats are simple and relaxed, and that means it's not particularly distracting. Equally though, because of that, people criticise the genre, as I've said, for being bland and repetitive with lots of simple generic beats that all sound the same and all have this aesthetic for the pictures where you just take a cartoon character looking sad and put some 90s style filter on it and job done. You know, and that's a fair criticism, but I think you can say that about every genre in existence. You know, you have kind of early innovators that in some rough manner kickstart a genre, then there's more innovators who gradually push it in new directions. However, they become surrounded by a swarming mass of people just doing the same old stuff again and again until what was quite a fluid, innovative genre comes to have a rigid, easy to spot aesthetic. You know, that happens with everything, and it's kind of where punk rock, as a simple example, ran into trouble. You know, that it all started as something new and rebellious, and people wore mad outfits like nothing ever before, but then everyone started dressing and making music like that, and it became just an ordinary fashion, which sort of stripped the rage and rebellious feel that punk had carried in the first place. Too many people diluted it down into the same old sludge, which is fine, it's inevitable. You know, the more creative ones slowly took it in new directions to spawn subgenres and other types of rock, like hardcore as one example. So maybe the same will happen with lo-fi hip-hop. It's just when the genre itself exists largely on YouTube and other social media platforms, it's less easy to filter out the bad music and just keep the good bits, because all of it gets thrown into your recommended, you know? That's why the big lo-fi hip-hop channels that promote are so essential for helping filter that stuff for you. At least that's part of their aim. That was a tangent though anyway. The point is, I love lo-fi hip-hop and I was going to tell you why. So, obviously it's partly because it is a good non-distracting music to relax/study to. Throughout the day when I'm writing or reading or whatever other projects I'm working on, I'll play some form of music in the background to help me focus. Sometimes that's classical or world music, ambient, trip hop or lo-fi beats. I have a lo-fi hip hop playlist that's 8.4 days long now, so I can just press shuffle on that and leave it going if I want to. Lo-fi hip hop is nice though because it often reminds me of what it's like to be a teenager. I mean, I'm 25 now, so my adolescence wasn't really that long ago, but you do forget things very easily. Only specific bits stick out in your mind, and they're all now wrapped up in the context of what you know now as an older person, and it gives it all a different perspective you never had back then. I can't say I really remember what it's like to be 15. I can't say I'll ever fully remember, but it's still good to try, because the people who are 15 now are the new generation. They're going to be the driving focus of the world, and it's important we can still empathise with and try to understand them, and that does start with trying to remember what it is like to be them. Not that I consciously try, just music's there, and it does remind you, and that makes it interesting, you know. The melancholy you can feel at that age, the drama of it, the way every bad thing or bad feeling is like the end of the world, the loneliness you do feel whenever your crush doesn't like you back or you have a breakup with someone, the sense of feeling lost and disillusioned with the world as you've grown up and discovered it's not as simple as it seems when you were like 5 years old. You know, everything's confused and flawed, and that makes it hard to believe in these teachers and parents and people that are meant to help you grow. So just from a curiosity standpoint, adolescence is a really interesting time of life. You're figuring out what love is for the first time and who you are and what your body is. It's the age you first discover nostalgia, really, because, you know, before adolescence you're too young to really have anything to reminisce about much. So these are all kind of new feelings, and depression too tends to become more common around this age. It's such a weird time of life for experiencing all these things, and because it's your first real experience with a lot of this stuff, every good experience is like the top of the world, the peak of existence, and every bad experience is like the end of the world. There's rarely the middle ground, and I think you get all of that kind of feel in lo-fi hip-hop, because it isn't just the melancholic feelings, it's also the drama, the drama of them. Like some of the titles you get for lo-fi tracks or mixes on YouTube, you know, it's that drama, that extreme intensity there is to everything at that age, where you do write things like that, and those titles sound like things that would come from the diary of a 15-year-old. And it is kind of ridiculous and over the top, but that's what's so endearing about it, in my opinion. At that age, that is how you genuinely feel. It only seems ridiculous now, looking back on it, but at the time, it's as deep as anything ever gets. And that's quite nice, you know? Not necessarily for any particular reason, it's just quite nice sometimes to almost half remember what it's like to be a teenager and to remember how you used to feel about the world. And I don't say any of that to discredit the art of the genre either. I mean, it is a very good genre, I think, that does have a lot of creative, very good stuff in it that does make me feel at this age. So I'm not all pinning it down to it's just teenage stuff that seems ridiculous now. It's not all that, it's definitely not. I'm just, you do get some of that in it, that aesthetic, I think. And there's something else about lo-fi hip-hop. The reason I think it has become so vastly popular across the world today, because I mean it is a cultural movement, really. If I was calling the punks a movement earlier, and there's the hippies and like everything else, you know, sometimes you can look at the present day and think, well, those sort of movements are gone now, they don't happen anymore, we don't have that kind of thing, but we do. You know, lo-fi hip-hop is a cultural movement, it's just mostly done through the internet. It doesn't have the rage or the sense of freedom that came with, like, the punks or the hippies. I keep using them as the two examples, apparently, but I think that gives us a deep insight into what this new generation feels growing up in 2020, and I suppose my generation, to an extent. They're not full of rage and power. They don't feel that same rebelliousness, for the most. Obviously they do in part, but the overwhelming feelings are the melancholy, the isolation, the loneliness, the depression. Depression is rage turned inwards. This new generation doesn't explode outwards and get angry at the world to such the same extent. Instead, they shut themselves away in their bedrooms and they try to study, but they feel alone and isolated and depressed. They turn it all inwards. Hence music that expresses those sort of themes, like lo-fi hip-hop does. It becomes so popular because it's so widely and vastly relatable. This is a generation that in many ways has been denied the chance to rebel. The millennials that are kind of spat on and ridiculed over everything, sneered and laughed at, you know, so they don't explode outwards. They instead keep themselves to a softer, quieter sadness. And I'm not saying that's worse, you know, in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. It's just a different way of expressing the same sense of delusionment you can have at that age. But it's no wonder depression, suicide, anxiety, loneliness are all at all-time highs. It's no wonder if this new generation does feel pretty bleak and melancholic about the world before them. You hope that they grow and they process their feelings and they find contentment within themselves in spite of whatever mess the world is around them, but until then, lo-fi hip-hop is an outlet. It's a space that does let them process their melancholic feelings, and so you get streams and mixes online where kids all over the world come together with very little anger or hatred towards anyone in the comments, to just relax and connect and feel what they feel for a bit. It's not a physical space, but it's still their space, digitally, over the internet, and that's quite nice. I like lo-fi hip-hop because it's music, and if it's good, music in any genre is worth listening to. It's as simple as that. But I also like lo-fi hip-hop because it's interesting as a cultural force. It's interesting for what it tells us about the isolated feel of the modern world, and at its simplest, it is good music to put on in the background of a YouTube video while you ramble on about whatever's on your mind. I hope you like this video. Give it a like if you did, subscribe if you fancy, comment any thoughts you might have, good or bad. Support me on Patreon if you fancy doing that a little bit extra. Otherwise, hopefully see you next time.